When a fishing boat pulled in its net, they expected the usual catch, until they hauled up something far heavier. Tangled in the lines was a body strapped to a strange metal frame. For decades, no one knew his name, and he was only known by a grim nickname. Today, we uncover the mystery of the Rack Man. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the supernatural. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing this case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
All right, okay, we're out at sea. I'm all about it. Any mystery that has to do with the sea or space is, I'm 100% in.
Yeah.
It's absolutely terrifying, but yet so beautiful.
They're one and the same to me.
Yeah. We're just like not really discovered. We don't really like mess with it too much, but we're out there sometimes.
Yeah, we're just out there kicking our little legs, paddling along until we dig up a body that shouldn't be there. And this is a really, really interesting one. And honestly, we are back in Australia. I don't know if there's something in the water or if I've got a fever and the only prescription is more Australia. Because I feel like this year we've had, like, every other mystery feels like it's happening in Australia. So we're pouring some out for you Aussies. Here's a shoey for you.
Oh, God.
Just another true crime down under.
I mean, it's a terrifying place. How many times do you see a TikTok video where there's just some giant spider or snake or scorpion in someone's house? And Australians are built different, man. They're like, yeah. You know, it's just, we run into that every once in a while. I'm like, damn, dude, if I get a mosquito in my house, I hear a zzz in the middle of the night, I'm terrified. I'm freaking out. I'm going to get bitten up, let alone having one of the world's deadliest spiders, like, just chilling in my house.
Yeah, I saw a silverfish in my closet the other day, and I almost ran a fire drill. So everything in Australia feels like it's out to get you in some way. It's toxic, poisonous, or just bites you. But anyway, yeah, we are in the outback, essentially. Not really the outback, but we are in Australia. And this case is super, super interesting. And you'll come to find we do know the individual that was found. You know, we'll watch as we move from the 90s into the turn of the century, and DNA comes to play eventually. So there are some modern revelations. But really, man, the questions behind this are really fascinating. And I think we're going to get a good idea of the picture at play. But there's going to be one big hanging question that creates so much, like, just a lot of morbid curiosity around this case. Of course, being the Rack itself that he got this nickname for, the Rack Man. But before we dive in, as always, I love to give those shout outs to the task force members who support us directly over at redwebpod.com. We got the buff minds, you know, muscular, vascular veins on those brains, Sir Curbs and Kai Yeti, to name a few. And of course, the ones that Fredo is always trying to have new machinations for how to melt, our Squonk tier members, Brett Omura G and Mitch W, just to name a few of them.
All I got to say about that is, you know, we give shout outs for our Squonk members. And if you don't hear a Squonk member's name after a while, just know I got him.
You got him. Okay, so that's what that is.
Got the ass. Got him.
I figured it was a complacency thing. You know, we continue to thank them for their amazing support because they are tremendous. And then, you know, Fredo ends up using me as some sort of nice bait. And then I lull them into the false sense of security with hospitality and gratefulness. And then you go, I looked at you, bam, puddle.
I mean, it's essentially a hit list is what you're reading. You know what I mean? And if you don't hear the name after a while, just know they're a wet rag in a jar with their name on it.
A collection of jars in his closet.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, I remember that one.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to get you.
I got one with your name on it.
I'm going to get you.
And right now, over at Patreon, there's a lot at play. We're also developing some new stuff. So if you want to check out the pilot version of the video podcast for Red Web, that's something we're in the works on cooking up. You can go check that out. We did that about 2 weeks ago exclusively as a thank you for you guys supporting us directly. That will come online here in the coming weeks or so as we figure out the new editing process. We also have the current March Mystery Madness going on. So please come in, free members, paying members, everybody alike. Come vote on your favorite mysteries. Let's see who wins this bracket. And then, of course, we're going to run some blogs, maybe some vlogs to weekly digest what your comments are, what your picks are, and all of that. And as we dive in, Another last shout out to Razor Crest for submitting this one. Task Force member on Patreon, there is a form where you can submit topics for Movie Club or the mysteries, and we love to see what you guys want to hear from us. But with that, Fredo, let's dive in. I'm going to take you down under and all the way back to August 11th, 1994. A fisherman named Mark Peterson and his crew were out on the Hawkesbury River. The river is just north of Sydney, Australia, and reaches out towards the Pacific Ocean. Per their later reports, around lunchtime, the fishermen released a net from the Lady Marian, which is the name of the boat they were on, and eventually they felt a heavy tug, so strong, in fact, that almost like an anchor, it lurched the boat to the side. Now, just to give you a more specific idea of where we're at, this is a long river. We're almost directly north of Sydney at this point, about 19 miles, maybe 30 kilometers, at a point called Coen, New South Wales. This is where the river's mouth kind of opens up into the Pacific, so if this is the scene of dumping the body, it's almost like this man could have been lost to the wilds of the ocean, you know what I mean?
Right.
So the crew, now responding to this lurch of the ship, begins pulling up the net, and when they do so, they found a strange metal contraption covered in black plastic sheeting or bags. It's really hard to say, and various reports have different descriptions, but black plastic sheeting of some type. According to news.com.au, an online Australia news outlet, Peterson said this to reporters, quote, "As I pulled it in, I saw there were plastic bags tied to it, and then I saw a bone stuck out of one of those bags," end quote. So think of this, Fredo. You're a fisherman, you're out on the boat, you're doing your thing, something yanks on your net, and then when you pull that up, it's heavy and you see bones. What is your first move? What are you thinking at this moment?
You gotta call the police. You know?
Yeah.
Call the authorities.
Someone else, you know? Someone responsible.
Someone needs to come take this off my hands, you know?
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and write up a report. I go, damn it. Like, here goes my day.
Right. I'm just looking for dinner, you know?
Right. Which is like also unfortunate because, you know, someone has passed away. Most likely, they're like, this is human bone, which it probably is. And it's like, okay, then, we know that it is, but like, as the person pulling it out, it's like, oh, that might be what I think it is.
Yeah.
It's like unfortunate that someone was essentially murdered and then dumped into the ocean, Dexter style.
Right. That does seem to be what's happening.
Yeah. And now it's like, okay, call the authorities. I'm not worried about getting in trouble. You know, you're fisherman, you have a license, and you just happen to dig something up. In the same way that people like throw those magnets in those ponds and creeks and they pull out like guns or explosives. Yeah, I've seen those videos. People like, you know, pull that out, they call the authorities right away, report it.
Yeah.
It's in that same sense. I mean, again, referencing Dexter, terrified there might be more bodies, you know?
Oh my God, you might have stumbled into a little graveyard or something.
Yeah, man. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, there goes the day, essentially. Like, this is going to be a whole thing.
100%.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate to stumble in, but I love that I asked you, right? To compliment myself, mostly because you have such a good instinct for this kind of thing. And when you hear these cases for the first time, I always want to get your gut check because I'm super in the weeds with Jillian and Christian and we know all the ins and outs, but I want to make sure that I hear from the audience, like you're that proxy, because what does one do in a situation like that? And what you're feeling is very much what they were feeling, because when they saw these bones, immediately they're thinking, okay, these must belong to some sort of animal, but what animal would be dumped out here in this strange, heavy manner with this metal contraption?
Right.
And when they look closer, they realized something was definitely wrong. The bones certainly started to look a little bit more human in the size and shape. At least that's their kind of inclination. And it is attached to this metal frame. So of course, per your gut instinct, Peterson contacted the Broken Bay Water Police. The crew, along with the police, brought the body to Patonga Wharf along the river, where Gosford Physical Evidence Officer confirmed that these were indeed human remains. So it does look like the scene is this. A person was tied to a metal structure, wrapped in the plastic, and then thrown into the water. The next day, on August 12th, the body was then taken to New South Wales Institute of Forensic Medicine in Glebe, a suburb of Sydney. So in Glebe, forensic pathologist Dr. Chris Lawrence studied the body and the metal structure itself. Now, here is a gruesome term, I'm not sure if you've ever heard it, called grave wax. It had formed on the corpse, which luckily did do some level of preservation to keep some of the victim's features, and it did help later on in the identification. But grave wax, also called corpse wax, is known as adipocere. That's the scientific term, and it forms when body fat is exposed to moisture and bacteria, turning it into this soap-like substance, this waxy material that coats you, and it often prevents further decomposition of internal organs as well as the face, though we will find as we talk about this case, there is some level of decomposition that definitely makes identifying the body quite difficult.
Yeah, no, I've never heard about that, but I mean, yeah, it sounds up to par. There's all kinds of different ways that the body decays, and then depending on the environment, like that's a whole thing too as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, depending on the environment you've been in, you know, what is the, oh gosh, now I've blanked. There's like that prehistoric man or woman that died from like a puncture wound in their back, but they're up in the mountains where it's cold and dry and they were frozen and essentially preserved. This is like the opposite of that, where they're in a warm and wet environment where decay happens rapidly. It also reminds me of the case, and we talked about this in an episode, spontaneous human combustion. And some of the theories involved around that do relate to perhaps grave wax, but specifically the body fat and how that comes to play. And maybe that's part of what's burning, almost like a human candle kind of situation.
Oh, God, weird.
Yeah, but otherwise, it's not often that we talk about a case that includes this adipocere element, you know? So Dr. Lawrence identified the body as a man, and he noted that it had been submerged for about 6 to 12 months based on decay and everything he was seeing. The body itself was attached to this frame, this metal material, with a rope. There was an orange non-slip knot at the throat and another tie around the waist. The body may have been attached at the wrist and ankles as well, but sources kind of vary on this. As far as the frame, or the so-called rack, it was a long piece of flat metal about 6 feet long or 1.82 meters, and it had multiple metal bars welded to it. I believe 4 rods at almost equidistant length going down it, but these 4 rods were welded to the main length of metal, evenly spaced, and some were described as having bent around the body, almost kind of like a rib cage, and presumably that was to hold the body in the frame, right? So imagine now a long 6-foot piece of metal, and then almost like a T with multiple cross sections, you have 4 rods. And this is where descriptions vary depending on the source. Some say that all 4 of these rods were curved like a rib cage. Some have them all as straight. Some have the middle 2 as curved and the top and bottom ones as straight. But either way, we do have at least a visual, like an artistic rendition of this, as well as one of the rare photos of this rack on the vessel itself for you if you want to take a look.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a rod up the middle. And then crossing are 1, 2, 3, 4 rods. The base starts at the ankles, then the knees, then the elbows, then the neck. So yeah, it pretty securely ties the body down. So like, this is terrifying because like, what was the cause of death? Essentially, is what I'm trying to get at here.
Right, that's the question.
Because when you're tying someone down like that, it's 2 things. You know, you want them to drown to death, or you know, you really want to secure the body as it sinks down to the ground. But either way, you know, it could be both of those things together simultaneously. Oof.
I mean, your head's in the right place. That's the right question to be asking is, was he deceased before tying to the rod? Is the rod just a way to anchor them to the bottom of this body of water? Or was it more gruesome to your question? Is it that they were alive when submerged? But take a look at the second image as well. You can kind of see it's an old photo, right? You can see the rack on the boat itself. It's a little hard to make out there, but you see the top and the bottom cross sections, or those cross rods better.
Yeah, it looks like a plank with like flimsy little rods.
Yeah, like it's one of the top ones is like bent.
Yeah, the reference, like the photo that has like kind of like a drawn piece. It looks like a much sturdier rod that's used throughout the device. But here it looks like a plank with like just little, I don't know what the word is for the thin rods like that they use in like concrete and stuff, but that.
Oh, those like those steel rods. Yeah, what are those called?
They're steel rods, but I thought they specifically had like a name, but it looks like that.
Rebar.
Rebar.
That's what it is.
I was like, yeah.
But you're right. It does look like that. And the rendition, like it does make it look chunky and meaty. But the actual item, it does look, yes, it's still metal, but it does look a little bit more I don't know. So maybe the bends are from dragging it up or from it hitting the bottom or just from it being scrap metal. Who knows?
True.
Now, with regards to the plastic bags, there's a lot of questions around that. So investigators started to think, well, is this a way to conceal the body while it's being transported? Who knows? Is this a way to kind of prevent them from seeing where they're going? Is this a way to, for some reason, prevent decay or slow it down? A lot of questions remain around that. Now, what is certain is that the man had essentially been crucified to this custom-made steel frame. To be precise, a literal crucifixion is not what we're looking at, but it does paint a very morbidly accurate portrait of the scene at hand, right?
Yeah.
At least tied at the neck and waist, if not also at the knees and elbows. So investigators determined, of course, that the frame was custom-made. Whoever made this made it with the intent of doing exactly this, and that it would have been too heavy for one person to carry it, especially with the victim attached to it. So our suspects pool now immediately opens up to a pair or maybe a group of individuals. And while, of course, this is still an unsolved mystery, it does start to paint that profile that we're looking for. Does this unknown person, this John Doe, have they run afoul with a group? Do they know a group of people that might have it out for them? These are more narrow questions than anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thinking about it could be a group of people to do this. I mean, at that point, you think, is it mafia? Is it that kind of thing?
Good questions.
Was in trouble with the mafia? This doesn't seem like something a government would necessarily do.
Right.
Not that they wouldn't outright kill someone, but more so there's cleaner ways to dispose of a body if the government has the resources, which they would.
Right. There's accidents that could be had and covered up if it was a more high-profile entity. Otherwise, I think your inclination might be closer to, the cement shoes situation that we've seen in cases before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the mafia just put some weights on an individual and off they go. So, coming back to Dr. Lawrence, after some time, he determined that the body belonged to a Caucasian male with dark brown hair between the ages of 23 and 46. It is quite the range, but there's a lot of decay. They were roughly 5'2" to 5'4", so not all that tall, so this would be probably a more distinct individual, between 160 and 166 centimeters if you prefer. Now, to be more specific about the plastic bags, it seems that 2 of them were used to cover the head. Again, questions remain there. I'm very curious if you have any thoughts as we continue, Fredo, but it also appears that this John Doe died from blunt force trauma to the head, so he likely received these blows before being put into the water, though whether or not, to your question, he was deceased at the time of being attached to the frame is unknown, right? Especially with that decay,
Right.
You can't really tell, were there water in the lungs? Well, probably, because even if he was deceased before going in, there was a lot, like I said, of decay happening,
Yeah, there's just so much decay, so it's so hard to tell comparatively to being frozen or just being on dirt or just not in water. You said multiple bags over the head?
2 bags.
That makes me think that they hit him over the head and then just in case to make sure they want to throw 2 bags to suffocate him or maybe not look at the person.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought.
It's you want to suffocate them, but you're going to throw them in the water anyway. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of leaning towards I don't want to look at the person's face.
Oh man, you're painting a picture I don't really want to fully see, but I think you might be onto something.
Yeah, because it feels like you're just doubling up if you're throwing a bag and then throwing them into the water.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess you knock them out. Then if you're taking them, you throw the bag on. So if they're not dead, they're suffocating. And then you throw them into the water. So yeah, there's that route too. So yeah, I could see both now.
Yeah. I'm thinking too, a couple options here as we kind of brainstorm on this kind of curious beat here. Let's say there's a bag on the head, they hit him on the head. And what if that created a split in the bag or whatever? And again, to your point, they don't want to see it. They don't want to create a blood trail for the sake of forensics. They don't want to.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah. Let this person's identity be seen by anybody. But also, even more morbidly, what if they're just trying to create a rudimentary, albeit a very temporary seal, right? If you're trying to breathe in a plastic bag, which is quite dangerous, please don't ever do that. But if they're trying to, so to speak, torture somebody and they do that and then they throw them in the water, does it make the experience even worse is all I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Is the goal here to really punish this person in a gruesome way. So they're kind of floating down to the bottom, trying to breathe within this bag, and it's kind of watertight, so they're alive a little bit longer than they should be. I don't know. Oof, tough.
Yeah, all of it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah. You know, it's odd to explore, but it also, again, paints a better picture as to who is capable of something like this, who would want to, what was their motive to go this far, essentially. But in the end, when found, what made it difficult to identify them, right? So there's some decay, the corpse wax is helping preserve some things like the face. The water had removed his fingerprints, his face had started to decompose some, and DNA testing wasn't as widely available as it is at this time, right? So we're at that turn of the century where it's becoming more approachable, it's becoming more part of these cases, but it won't be really a part of this case for yet some time. Now, the time spent underwater and normal decomposition made it difficult to get that DNA sample, right? So Dr. Chris Griffiths studied the body's teeth, and he found that there were no fillings, so dental records would be a little bit more complicated. They wouldn't be as unique. However, he did note that the face had an unusual bone structure, and so this person might have had a misshapen face or at least a very distinct look. And so that does kind of start to help close the gap a little bit. But either way, the man could not be matched with anybody from any existing missing reports at the time, and so he was given the name Unknown Human Remains E48293, but most news outlets called him the Rack Man.
Ooh, look, whoever named it, that was a good name.
They're gonna sell some copies.
Yeah, for sure. That's a menacing name. It's not even like a person that's doing the murders, it's the person that got murdered.
Yeah. It just paints that very vivid, unfortunate picture, right? And so at this point, we have an unknown human who's essentially reduced to a nickname and a number. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Shady Rays. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium polarized lenses, and they won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that has been offering a world-class product rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people for quite some time now. Plus, if your shades ever go missing or take an unexpected hit, don't even sweat it. You're out there hunting Bigfoot, they get swiped off your face, don't stress. They have the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Every pair is backed by lost or broken replacements. If you don't love your shades, exchange for a new pair or return worry-free within 30 days. Task Force, you heard me say it before, and I'm going to say it again. I wear my Shady Rays every single time I go outside. I'm obsessed with polarized lenses, especially in this very sunny state of Texas. As the spring rolls around, I got to get my daily walk in. Sometimes I'm going running, and they have a style to fit every style I've got going on my lower half. You know, if I've got something swell and clean and I want that Men in Black look, they've got it. If I want something sleek and athletic, they also have it. I have a style for every occasion, and I'm just a big fan of Shady Rays, truly. And exclusively for Task Force members, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal. Head to shadyrays.com and use code REDWEB for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself. The shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Again, promo code REDWEB at shadyrays.com. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Shopify. Task Force, when you think about businesses with criminally good sales like Magic Spoon, you think about an in-demand product, all the premeditated branding and scary good marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually a business behind the business, making selling and buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going. So if you're growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to go selling wherever your customers are scrolling and strolling on the web, in your store, or on their feed, and everywhere in between. You want to make sure your product is accessible. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Magic Spoon uses. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/redweb, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/redweb to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/redweb. So police begin offering a $100,000 reward for any information that not leads to the suspects, right, because they don't have any, but instead leads to the identification of Rackman himself, and yet no one ever came forward. So Rackman had no personal belongings on his body at the time besides a pack of Benson & Hedges cigarettes and a pink lighter in his pocket. He was wearing an Everything Australia branded polo and a No Sweat branded track pant, both of them size medium. Now, with this information becoming public, you have another step in this investigation where people become helpful, right? They want to support with any information they can possibly give to close this case, right? And Everything Australia themselves, the brand, came forward and told police that the particular shirt tag design that was used on the shirt he was wearing was used between 1982 and 1987. It is quite some time, but that allows them to at least start maybe looking at receipts, or if it can help, again, paint a more vivid picture. But they had stores all across the country, but primarily in the states of New South Wales and Queensland. So we are beginning to tighten in our search.
Oh man, what a wide search it is though, you know?
It's, yeah, so wide.
I mean, we talked about it before, but I mean, you never see this in the movies, like the amount of just desk and paperwork that detectives would have to go through.
Yeah.
Sorting and shifting through files, you know, now PDFs, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, now it's street footage, cell phone stuff. Like, it's just, man, that's lots of hours of work every single week. Not even, you know, the quote unquote flashy part of the job.
Right.
Getting out there, knocking door to door, making house calls. But like, yeah, just the you know, put your head down and work kind of work.
Right. The rubbing the temples, the staring at the screen, the scrubbing over, just like you said, countless hours of material to find anything. At the University of Sydney, Professor Donald Anderson actually used the barnacles that had formed on the frame to determine that it was in fact submerged for less than a year. It's not necessarily possible to get any more specific than that, but what's helpful is that it does corroborate Dr. Lawrence's earlier estimates of that 6 to 12 month time frame. Also at the University of Sydney, a student named Maya Sutisno created a reconstruction of the face, which led to artistic interpretations of what the victim could have looked like. I am a huge fan of this. This is so cool when, whether it be for true crime and forensics, or whether it be looking back at ancient Egypt and mummies and things like that, when people that have all this amazing brain knowledge and they're buff scientists, you know, they can get in there, scan bone structures, and be able to pull out like a full, almost living likeness. And we do have photos of what this could look like. There is a sculpture in the first image, and then the second image are more two-dimensional artistic renderings of with different hairstyles and slightly different skin to kind of give a range of what this person could have looked like when alive.
Let me take a look. Oh, wow.
Take a little gander.
Oh, that is an interesting sculpture. It's like,
it's a very interesting sculpture.
It's like a cross between realistic and hyper not realistic. I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, that uncanny valley.
Yeah.
It has that death mask feel to it.
It does. It's a, you know, white male, black hair, kind of like bowl cut-ish, but like really long. Yeah, and then that second one is, okay, there's 3 different renditions. The first one is, yeah, it looks about the same. A little bit more wrinkles along the, from the nose down to the chin.
Mm-hmm.
And the middle one is no hair. The one on the left has hair that's short. The one on the right has hair that's a little bit longer, still kind of flattened down.
Yeah, it's kind of using that bone structure to generate a possible yet narrow range of what this person could have looked like, which is immensely helpful. And I will say,
that's wild.
Yeah, dude, it's super wild. Part of this mystery has been solved. We're gonna dive into it in just a second, but we do know the identity of this person. So because of that, I want you to keep these images in mind, because again, this person is generating a likeness and some interpretations to help potentially figure out who this is, or at least reach out to the populace and say, do you know somebody like this that might be missing, etc. So of course, now with relatively limited information to go off of, investigators had a handful of missing persons who might have been Rackman. First up, we have Joe Biviano, a missing drug dealer who resembled a physical description, but more modern studies have shown that his family DNA does not match that of this John Doe. Next up, we have a man named Peter Mitris, a missing businessman who was initially considered, but then quickly ruled out because he was known to be much more tall than this body itself. So not 5'2" to 5'4". Let's rule him out. Third up, you have Christopher Dale Flannery, a hitman known as Mr. Rent-A-Kill, but his dental records did not match that of these bodies. So the fourth individual we're going to talk about is Max Tancevski, a missing gambler, but his DNA did not match. We'll come back to this individual in just a second, because a flag's going to raise, right? And we'll talk about it, but I'll let your instinct speak to it. So it wasn't until August of 2018, 24 years later, that Rackman was finally identified with modern DNA analysis. And it turns out it was, in fact, Max Tancevski, which was confirmed then by NSW Deputy State Coroner Paul McMahon. And we have an image of that individual.
Oh, wow. Oh, there he is.
So you can see where they were kind of accurate. You can see where they were slightly off due to the interpretations, right?
Yeah. It's mostly, I would say, off. There are some parts that kind of hit. Taking a look, lips are kind of the same size. Eyebrows are more curved than straight. Hair is different. He's got like a big receding hairline on the right side. Looks like his hair is combed to the side, towards the left. Yeah. Man,
I think what really stands out to me is like the hair is probably going to be the most affected by, being in the water and being like in a bag and kind of decomposing and falling off or whatever. But I think, it's really interesting to hear your kind of perspective, because you're seeing it now kind of for the first time. I feel like when I saw it and I looked at the bald iteration of this interpretation, and then I saw his face, the eyes and the nose stuck out to me so much. We're not seeing his teeth in this image, so we're not going to see like the unique dental patterns that he has on his front teeth to help connect the dots. I just remember when I first saw these, I was like, oh my gosh, it looks so similar. But honestly, now that I'm kind of hearing you kind of identify it, there are some pretty big differences,
Yeah.
But I would say they're in the soft tissues, the cheeks being full, the nose cartilage being a little different. And I'm wondering if, how much of that is within the decay, because as impressive as it is to be able to build a face off of the bone structure, without a really accurate musculature or, face fat and cheeks and all of that, it's, I imagine, quite difficult. But
yeah, even just being able to try and put something together is wild.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there is some stuff that they nail and some stuff that's like pretty off. So it's pretty interesting to see.
It kind of reminds me of like a police sketch artist. When you've seen somebody and you try to describe it and then they draw that, it gets close, it starts to give you an idea, but it's not always like dead accurate, right?
Right.
But what stands out to me, and I'm not sure if you noticed this, but Max Tancevski was initially ruled out because his DNA did not match at the time. And it wasn't for 24 years that they actually connected the dots and said, no, it is the same DNA. And so I was speaking with Jillian about that, and I was curious, like, what caused that to happen? And it seems that because of being in the water for quite some time, that decay had set in and it made it hard to pull a more accurate DNA analysis. And also, we're still in the early throes of that high level, very accurate DNA analysis. And so there are a few reasons why it didn't fully align, and it almost feels like it ended up being a false negative, I guess.
Right. Again, you're throwing it in like one of the worst conditions you could possibly throw it in, right?
Right.
In terms of like having a full body and mostly intact, the decay is just so bad with water. And so to even like get to an endpoint is astounding in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tancevski was a 37-year-old Caucasian man and a known gambler from Newtown, a suburb of Sydney. So up until this point, I'm greatly impressed with some of the estimates, right? And some of the honing in, rather than just being like, yep, it's a Caucasian man, that's all we got.
Right.
They did start to narrow in pretty impressively given the lack of other evidence, right? So it seems that he left Newtown to gamble at the Gold Coast near Brisbane, over 500 miles north of Sydney. With him, it is said that he had $1,800 in cash, and this would have been back in January of 1993 when he suddenly disappeared. Again, as you know, it wouldn't be for another 20 months before a fisherman would pull him up out of the body of water onto the Lady Marian. And regarding his so-called January gambling spree, I've seen it referred to, his partner at the time said that this trip was not out of character for him, nor was the amount of money that he was holding on his person an unusual amount. It was likely intended for gambling. Usually came home within a few days, according to the book Unsolved Australia, and there's very little publicly available information about Tancevski beyond this. So even with his identity, it is still unclear why Tancevski ended up dead in the water and attached to a metal frame contraption that seemed built for him. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Factor. Ready to optimize your nutrition for this year? Well, Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick a meal that is tailored to your goals. You can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Reach your goals this year with ingredients that you can trust and convenience that just cannot be beat. I really enjoy the Factor meals that I get because I like to focus on the protein stuff. I want to get that protein goodness in me, but I also want to make sure that I'm still eating right, still getting my vegetables and things. And that's where Factor makes it all super easy. You don't have to worry about dirtying up a bunch of pots and pans. You just pop it in the microwave and it's tasty every single time. So you know that you're eating right and it's super, super easy. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FactorPodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Again, that's code FactorPodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's talk numbers. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up fast. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save an average of up to 50% per session. With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, saving you big on cost and time. Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach. I've learned over the years that therapy can be very helpful for learning positive coping skills, and it's important to learn how to set boundaries for yourself, and you empower yourself to be who you are, and you get all these tools with how to accommodate for the anxieties and stresses of life. And I appreciate just how approachable BetterHelp makes therapy for many people. It's tough to know where to get started. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's convenient as well. You can join a session with a click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/redweb to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/redweb. So with that, there are many theories to explore, but I'm very curious as we step into those theories, if you have any, again, gut instincts, any questions remaining for you, anything that stands out.
Like, even though we don't quite know, I mean, you gotta think it's probably related to gambling, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that, like, he owed money. It could have been like he pissed someone off at a gambling table. Because, you know, sometimes gambling could be high stakes, and even then high stakes with your life. And you don't know, like, if there's backdoor gambling that he went to or anything like that, you know, and then you got to think outside the box in terms of not just casinos or something like that. And it could be some kind of like a back room type of situation where they throw big money down. And yeah, and even there, it doesn't even necessarily mean you owe money. You could just piss someone off, the wrong person. So I definitely think it'd be gambling related.
I would think so too. I mean, that world is, money does a lot to a lot of people, and that is a high stakes, a lot of money flowing in and out kind of thing. And as they say, the house always wins. And so you can see how, you know, let's say one was counting cards, or one made out with a big pot of winnings, or a loan shark situation goes south. You know, there's a lot of elements within that we'll definitely explore, but there's also some really interesting other theories that I'm curious to dive into. But before we do it, one last thought I had was the partner. I was really curious, like, I guess, you know, if I were to say to anybody as a piece of advice, you know, if anyone came to me and said, having done 224 plus episodes of true crime and mysteries and all this unsolved, what's one thing you wouldn't do? And I would say, don't make it a habit to disappear for days at a time. Yeah. Because this is not the first time that someone disappeared on another sort of trip or spree of some kind, and then it just so happens to coordinate with a disappearance. Because his partner never phoned this in, never reported him as missing, or at least not for quite some time. And it's because they were like, well, that's just kind of what he did. And I figured he'd be back eventually. And all the more time goes by and the evidence continues to wane.
Yeah, that's just wow. I can imagine having someone that I know that's that close just disappear for days at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, especially nowadays with technology. There's so many ways to check in on them that they pop on social media, oh, it's a text.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's so easy to just know that they're still moving.
Sure. I mean, your phone's pinging towers. It's got GPS kind of almost always happening, even if your phone's off. But even heck, if you walk down any American neighborhood street, you're likely going to be clocked by 1,000 doorbell cameras,
Yeah, that's true. There's that too.
There's just so much surveillance. For better or worse, there's no way you're not being clocked by a camera somewhere, especially if you live like in a city. All right, so let's talk about some of these theories. First up is the idea of a satanic cult. One of the popular go-tos when you don't know who else to blame, right? So, due to the gruesome crucifixion-style nature of Tancevski's discovery, there was public concern that he was murdered as part of some sort of satanic ritual, right? This is kind of a swell from the populace, and around this time period, especially coming out of the 80s, there was a heightened fear around satanic rituals and the occult. I know D&D got swept up into that, for example, but it kind of became the omni boogeyman. It was one of the go-to things one would point at. Not to dismantle this theory, I'm just kind of contextualizing a little bit the time period. Now, while it would be strange to murder somebody in this particular manner, there's no other evidence to confirm that it would have been a satanic cult. There's no other iconography, no markings, no items, or anything like that would indicate a satanic ritual. And furthermore, many satanic rituals follow patterns. They're not typically one-offs. So the fact that this specific act hadn't happened before, hadn't happened since then, at least to our knowledge, maybe
right.
They weren't discovered, right? Despite the fact that this seemed to have worked, right? Whoever did this is still at large, never was found. It does indicate that it's unlikely to be a type of ritual, so to speak. However, police did take this theory seriously and investigated cults with a history of violent acts for religious purposes. Reports of supposed satanic activities were not uncommon during the 90s in Australia, particularly in New South Wales, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's very much a theory, and that is that. But with that said, let's move into the second one, because we're starting to get a little closer to where your mind is at, Fredo.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's like cult type stuff.
Yeah, and we would know, not having been a cult, we're not a cult.
No, we're not a cult.
We're not a cult. We don't put on our robes the same way everyone else does.
We don't gather together and wear similar clothing. No.
And hum hymns that we've kind of just make up on the spot, so it's completely discordant. And
you gotta have a secret, unique looking cup or anything like that. We don't do any of that.
No, we would never. But with that, theory number 2 revolves around gangland. So initially, police also theorized that the death could have been a so-called gangland killing. So this theory was only strengthened with the revelation of Tancevski's identity. So gangland killing is something I hadn't heard before, but it is a colloquial term to refer to murder connected with organized crime. I want to say that because that is how they approached it, the kind of nomenclature they used, but I don't want to get that mixed up with an actual case that happened between January 1998 and August 2010, known as the Melbourne gangland killings. That was a separate topic, so it's not part of that. Now, Detective Chief Inspector John Lehman told news.com.au that this was an unusual way of disposing of a body, and that, quote, a normal person would not meet their demise like this, so we think that the victim was involved with some kind of criminal activity, end quote. Fredo, you're in Chief Inspector now. You're Chief Inspector Gut. We're giving you a new badge. We're raising you to the 58th floor here of the task force.
There we go. And
he's a psychic, man.
First and foremost, I just want to institute martial law against all squonks within the vicinity. If you see them,
has no authority.
Lock them down. They're in little cult robes. They're running around. Feel free to look at them.
If you see them, no, you didn't, because now they're wet and just a puddle. But I mean, like that's, I mean, maybe it's an obvious conclusion to make, right? Because it is such an interesting way to go about it. But I love that you clocked in on that, which is why I wanted to pause at that moment. Because again, you're psychic. I feel like you see the future 3 minutes at a time, and it's impressive.
Yeah. Doesn't do much for me right now. Can't really monetize it too much.
It's kind of like the Mystery Men. You know, you have a power, and it's strange, but it works.
Yeah. I go invisible, but I can only go invisible when no one's watching.
Right, like a squonk. But yeah, I mean, I think this makes a whole lot of sense. Now, of course, as you also pointed out, Fredo, it's possible with Tancevski's history as a gambler, he may have owed somebody money or gotten involved in the wrong crowd. Now, this is a tale as old as time, unfortunately. There's a lot of people that owe the wrong people money, right? There's a whole show that's built on that foundation, right? Squid Game is the modern iteration of that tale.
Yeah.
You know, when people are addicted to a certain thing, they might seek to make that money back in a type of way. And so they go to more seedy individuals, high interest loans. And man, when you mess with the wrong person, they're not going to let anyone slip by because, you know, you give them an inch, all the people that owe you money will take a mile.
High interest.
Yeah. Well, life interest, it turns out. You know,
True.
That's a price too high to pay, right? Now, some have suggested that with that $1,800, yes, he might have been going out to gamble or what have you, but maybe it was to pay off his debts, which some argue would be quite an odd amount, quite a small amount to kill somebody over. Maybe this is all they had at the time, and so they said, hey, this is all I can give me some more time kind of thing. You know, we could theorize beyond theories about that, but others have suggested that Tancevski's death was to send a message or some type of warning. Though I would say that would be kind of strange.
Right. You threw it in the water. Or
you threw him in the water.
Really going to find it.
Right. Is that your calling card? I don't know if people know that that's your calling card, especially since he wasn't identified for 20 some odd years.
Yeah, it's a foggy way to send a message.
Right. Yeah, 24 years before he's identified is a weird way to then be like, see, that was mine. Now you have my message.
Right.
Don't not pay your debts. So it's also strange that no one came forward with any information about the murder if this was the case, right? So unless this gang runs an extremely tight ship, but I don't know. It's really hard to say. You never know what goes on inside the walls of organized crime. But especially with multiple people kind of seemingly helped with this, if this rack was heavy, it does stand to reason that organized crime, or at least a group, was involved. With the only thing that we really know about him being gambling, it's an obvious direction to start thinking about. But ultimately, there's no evidence to suggest that he engaged with or had any connection to any gangs or criminal activity. And we don't even know much more beyond his habit of gambling. Maybe it was just a periodic recreational thing that he did. We don't know how far it went. And so it's, again, just a theory. Hard to really dig into more. But that's where the third theory comes to play, the idea of a personal vendetta. Now, others have suggested that this highly unique, obviously labor-intensive, and intricate method of disposing of the body indicates a more personal connection to the killer. The frame was custom-made for Tancevski, his height, you know, like the crossbeams were at his elbows, waist, neck, and knees, so it's almost like it was built to his unique measurements, I guess?
Yeah, I could see that, yeah.
And now obviously it would take some level of welding skill to put it together. We don't know much about his social circle or who would know like how to do this, but it's possible that Tancevski made someone extremely angry, extremely upset, that again, just some sort of unknown vendetta was at play to go to this length, to do something this gruesome.
Right. I mean, you really had to piss someone off. Even then, it had to be like the right person. I mean, like that's resources. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Putting all that together, getting a boat, driving out there. Like, yeah, that's resources. Not a lot of people have a boat, you know?
True. That's very true.
I mean, you could rent one, but like that just seems kind of tricky.
Pay no attention to this large, heavy trash bag that we have.
Yep.
Whoops, it slipped. Anyway, let's get back to shore quickly. Yeah. I don't know. My mind is somewhere between this vendetta or this idea of loan shark kind of thing, this organized crime, or honestly, maybe you just run afoul of the wrong group and you got mixed up into something that has nothing to do with gambling, but I digress. So police believe that he may have been, in fact, tortured before he was put into the water. We talked about the blunt force trauma to the head, the unknown answer as to was he dead before or after he was submerged. According to Unsolved Australia, Chief Inspector John Lehman of NSW Police wondered, quote, why was he attached to this frame? Why wasn't he simply weighed down with concrete and disposed of in the water? Was this some kind of torture rack? End quote. With the frame being extremely heavy, it's very likely it took more than one person, as I indicated earlier. And again, this does point to a group. Tancevski, it seems, did owe money to a few people, though the amount is unknown. And one of the individuals in these groups might have been a welder and maybe came up with this odd contraption to submerge him. But otherwise, that's where the theories end. You know, we know now who this person was. But the unfortunate reality is that we may and likely never will know what happened, what went down, and why he was submerged in such a unique and gruesome way.
We're just not going to know. I mean,
yeah.
The people that did it went to such lengths, right, to like hide the body. I don't think there's a trail.
Yeah.
Especially when you have someone that disappears days at a time. Like, oh man, how do you really pin someone down like that?
Yeah. And disappeared for 20 months too, right? Like he was known by his partner to disappear for a few days and then come back home. But a lot can happen in 20 months. And remember, 2 different sources are saying it was at most 12 months that he was submerged. So that gives us anywhere from 8 months up to 14 months, give or take, that he's doing something, that he might be captured, that he might be, I don't know, tortured. Like what's happening in those months? And that, I think, is just as terrifying as the unknown as to how he got here.
Yeah, that's wild.
And then equally terrifying beyond that, as we always kind of feel coming away from an unsolved case, is whoever did this is still out there.
Yep.
Not that they're like habitually strapping people to these metal things, but they are capable of it.
Dude, it's wild. It could literally just, I mean, look, again, there's people that do it and don't get away with it, but there's also like how many serial killers where it's just like, if that person stopped at just one, would we have caught them?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that goes for bank robberies, all that kind of stuff. It's scary to think, but like, yeah, you could just have a neighbor who you like know, or a friend, and that you met in your older years or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, they did some pretty heinous stuff. It doesn't even have to be like, it could be under law. You know what I mean? There's people that they're veterans and they've taken lives. During their active duty to defend the country, and so, it doesn't necessarily have to be like this heinous illegal murder. It could be a legal one, and it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, you're just a normal person that's taking a life that lives next door. It's crazy.
Yeah, dude, as just a young little buck growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, the world was pure. I was playing with my Tinker toys, then I was playing with my video games. Simpler without knowing.
Right.
But as you know, Fredo, there's just something drawing about the darker side, the unknown side, certainly, of the underbelly of humanity.
Oh yeah.
And with that, we close the chapter on yet another unsolved case. This is the Rackman, also known as the crucifixion of Max Tancevski. Task Force, let us know what your theories are. We always love to see your theories in our Discord channel, available exclusively to our Task Force members at redwebpod.com. Of course, we also have bonus material coming up. Last month, we did a cryptid dating game. Right now, we have March Mystery Madness. We got the pilot episode of this podcast right here, of course, ad-free as well. And then, Fredo, you've got Movie Club kicking around.
Yes, we do. Anything from your classics to Jason X.
Hey, that's just classics to classics, man. Yeah, we recently did 1933's Invisible Man, which was really interesting. That I'm so happy we did that. I haven't watched a 30s movie in
we were talking about that's probably the oldest movie we've ever seen, and now that I think about it, it's probably gonna be some of the oldest movies, if not the oldest movie that anyone in the Task Force members have ever seen.
Yeah,
it just widens your view on movies. There's a bunch of movies that we watch, and you don't even have to watch along. You can just hear us break down the plot, give our opinions. It's a really good time.
Yeah, absolutely. You can watch it, come in knowing it all, or we always try to make it approachable. So come hang out. Lots going on over at our Patreon at redwebpod.com. But with that, Fredo, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.